What would you do if the very person you mocked turned out to be the one who held your fate in his hands? The sun had just begun to dip behind the mountains when they arrived, 5 men on horseback, clad in steel and silence. Their armor gleamed with the last light of day, and their eyes burned with disdain. The villagers watched in quiet unease as the riders dismounted, boots hitting the dusty earth like thunderclaps. These were not men who came in peace. They were samurai, outsiders from a foreign land, arrogant and cold. And they had come to prove a point. In the village of Linshu, Kung Fu was more than just movement. It was tradition, identity, and pride. Passed down through generations, its principles were etched into every wooden beam and every stone path. But to the samurai, it was nothing but a joke. They scoffed at the slow, graceful forms practiced by the village youth. One even laughed aloud, mimicking a crane stance with theatrical absurdity, drawing uneasy chuckles from the frightened crowd. Their leader, a tall man with a jagged scar running from his eye to his chin, stepped forward and declared in a deep, commanding voice, "We heard tales of Chinese Kung Fu. We came to see if the stories were true or just fantasy." His tone dripped with contempt, and so began the humiliation. But what no one in that crowd realized, what no one could have guessed, was that a pair of tired, sunken eyes were watching from the corner of the square. Hidden beneath layers of rags and years of dust, an old beggar sat cross-legged, motionless, and smiling. The first to step forward was Jian, a young kung fu disciple barely 20, but well respected in the village. His master had once called him the future of Linshu. With clenched fists and steady breath, he bowed politely to the samurai. They didn't return the gesture. Instead, they smirked. Jian moved first, swift, graceful, like water flowing downhill. His strikes were clean, his stance solid. But the samurai didn't move. He waited. Then, with one precise motion, he struck. Jian flew backwards, his body landing with a heavy thud on the dusty ground. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. He didn't get back up. Another student stepped in, then another. One by one, they tried to defend the honor of their village, their art, their ancestors, and one by one they fell. Each defeat was more brutal than the last, more humiliating. The samurai laughed openly now, tossing insults between themselves in their native tongue, mocking the villagers who dared to dream of martial prowess. The leader, the scarred one, raised his voice again. "This is Kung Fu? Where is your strength? Where is your honor?" Children clung to their mothers. Elders bowed their heads in shame. The master of the local Kung Fu school, an old man named Lao Wei, stood frozen, his heart heavy with guilt. He had taught these students to believe in balance, in humility, in inner power. But against brute force and cruel laughter, what had that wisdom amounted to? And still, the beggar sat. He had not moved since the samurai arrived. Flies buzzed around his tattered clothes. His hands, blackened with age and dirt, rested gently on his knees. Some children whispered that he was mute. Others said he had lost his mind years ago. No one really knew when he had come to the village. He was just always there, always silent, always invisible. But deep inside that hunched body, something ancient stirred, because the pain of these defeats wasn't just felt by the villagers. It echoed through memories the beggar had long buried, memories of temples, of fire, of betrayal, and of power. The samurai had now turned the village square into their stage. With every hour that passed, their cruelty deepened. They forced the defeated students to kneel, faces to the ground, while they reenacted the fights in exaggerated, mocking movements. The villagers were made to watch. Children cried. Even the strongest elders could no longer hide their shame. Master Lao Wei approached the samurai, his voice shaking but firm. "You've made your point. Leave us with our dignity." But the scarred samurai only grinned. "Dignity? You should have thought of that before calling your dance martial art." and with that, he slapped the old master across the face. The sound rang out like a gong through the square. Lao Wei staggered, blood on his lip, pride shattered. No one moved, no one dared, except one. A quiet scraping sound turned a few heads. The beggar, still seated, was shifting. Slowly, deliberately, he rose to his feet. A hush fell over the square as the villagers turned to watch the man they had ignored for years straighten his crooked back. His joints cracked like old wood. He was impossibly thin, his face lost behind a tangled beard and years of dirt. But his eyes, they were different now. Sharp, focused. The samurai laughed when they saw him. "You want to fight too, old ghost?" one of them shouted. "Maybe you'll bore us to death." But the beggar didn't speak. He walked barefoot across the square, every step light as breath, like he was gliding through air rather than stepping on stone. He stopped just a few feet from the scarred leader and raised a single trembling finger, pointing straight at him. The samurai's amusement turned to confusion, then anger. He drew his blade. Gasps echoed through the crowd. This wasn't a sparring match anymore. This was about to become an execution. But the old man didn't flinch. He simply stood there, motionless, like a tree in a storm. And in that silence, just before the blade fell, he did something that no one saw coming. The blade came down fast, a blur of silver aiming straight for the old man's neck. But before it could touch him, it stopped. No one understood what happened at first. It was as if time itself had paused. The samurai's sword had been caught, not by steel but by two fingers. The old beggar's hand, wrinkled and fragile, held the blade in place like it was nothing more than a falling leaf. Gasps turned into stunned silence. The samurai tried to pull the sword free, but it didn't move, not an inch. His arm trembled, muscles strained, but the beggar didn't even blink. Then, without a word, the old man twisted his fingers and the sword shattered in two. The samurai stumbled back, his face drained of color. In that moment, the village square changed. The power had shifted. The invisible beggar was now the center of everything. Without waiting, two other samurai lunged at him from both sides. The old man didn't run. He didn't brace. He simply moved. A fluid motion so fast it was almost a whisper in the air, a palm to the chest, a flick behind the knee. Two bodies hit the ground before anyone even realized what had happened. The villagers gasped again, but now, not in fear, in awe. The final two samurai hesitated. One roared and charged, blade raised. The beggar sidestepped and struck once, a soft touch to the shoulder. The man collapsed, unable to breathe. And now only the scarred leader remained. His arrogance was gone. His eyes darted in panic. Who are you?" he demanded. The beggar looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time in years, he spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, but calm. "I am no one, and that was your mistake." The scarred man attacked out of rage, not skill. And rage is a poor weapon. The fight lasted 5 seconds, a twist of the wrist, a flip, a strike to the heart, not to kill but to shame. The samurai landed flat on his back, looking up at the man he had mocked. The scarred samurai remained on the ground, his breath shallow, his pride completely crushed. The crowd was frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The same man they had ignored for years, laughed at, pitied, dismissed, now stood as an unstoppable force, calm in the center of chaos. The old man didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he turned to the villagers, meeting their eyes one by one. For the first time, they really saw him, not as a beggar, not as a ghost, but as something far greater. Master Lao Wei stepped forward, still holding the mark of the slap on his face. "Who are you?" he asked softly. The old man looked at him for a moment. Then, slowly, he removed the layers of rags covering his body. Beneath them, faded symbols became visible. Tattoos of ancient kung fu clans, symbols long thought lost. The dragon, the tiger, the phoenix. "I was once called Master Tian," he said, his voice calm but heavy with memory. I led the southern temple, but I lost everything. To arrogance, mine, and others. Gasps filled the air. The southern temple had been destroyed decades ago, betrayed by one of its own, and burned to ash. No one survived. At least, that's what everyone believed. I wandered, he continued. I gave up the name, the pride, the titles. I came here to find peace, and I did, until today. He turned back to the scarred samurai, now trembling in shame. You didn't come here to test skill. You came to break spirits. That is not the way of a true warrior. The samurai, overwhelmed, bowed his head to the dirt. I was wrong, he whispered. I dishonored myself. Tien looked at him a long moment before saying, Then you have a chance to begin again. And with that, he walked away, not claiming victory, not demanding worship, just walking. The villagers stood in silence, but in their hearts, something had changed. Their shame had been washed away, and in its place stood awe, respect, and a lesson none of them would ever forget. In the days that followed, the village began to breathe again. The young disciples trained with a renewed fire in their hearts, not out of anger or pride, but with purpose. They no longer feared the weight of failure, because they had witnessed the truth, that strength wasn't always loud, and power didn't always come dressed in gold or armor. Master Tian, once invisible, once broken, became a quiet presence once more. He didn't take over the school. He didn't seek revenge or recognition. He simply guided when asked, spoke when needed, and smiled when the village children bowed to him with genuine respect. The scarred samurai left with his men, humbled, quiet, changed, no longer conquerors, but students of a deeper truth. Before they departed, the leader returned alone to the square, knelt before Tian, and left his broken sword as an offering, not of surrender, but of honor. The villagers rebuilt more than their confidence. They rebuilt their unity. They told the story of the day. An old beggar rose from the shadows and reminded them of who they were. Because sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones we overlook. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is quiet justice served with open hands. What about you? Have you ever misjudged someone based on their appearance only to discover they were far more than they seemed? Tell us in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers.